Dwight D. Eisenhower must have spent a lot of time together. The parade ground was used for training exercises. It was also the place where soldiers lined up in parade formation any time an important dignitary or guest of honor visited the fort. This is what the parade grounds look like today. The grounds are still used for important events and ceremonies. One of the last places Fitzgerald would have stopped in before making his way to the Officers Club was the PX. This picture was taken circa 1920, which is a couple of years after Fitzgerald's stay. However, he would have stopped in here to buy personal sundries because we all know how well he kept himself groomed. With his other supplies, Fitzgerald would have purchased his cigarettes here as well. Now we are coming to the most important part of my presentation, and the most difficult to find and verify. Without the efforts of the fort's historical engineer and a retired history professor, their maps and their eager curiosity, I would have never been able to find the location. But I digress. The show must go on. The Officers Club, where Fitzgerald wrote from sun up to sundown on Saturdays and Sundays, was built in 1867. This black and white photograph was taken circa 1905. This is the side view of the Officers Club. This next photograph was also taken around 1905 and is a colorized version of the front view of the Officers Club. This next photograph of the Officers Club was taken around 1910. This view shows the front and right sides of the building. This photograph of a snow-trimmed Officers Club was taken sometime between 1911 and 1920. This last known photograph of the Officers Club was taken sometime in the late 1930s or early 1940s. Sometime during the 1950s, a new Officers Club was built in another location on the fort, which featured a swimming pool. The old Officers Club was originally known on fort maps as Building 42. This is the original specifications card of Building 42. This photograph shows the two intersecting street signs of McClellan and Custer Avenues. On this corner is where the original Officers Club stood. What is hilarious now, but wasn't so funny then, is that on her visit to the fort, Dana got the intersection right, but the corner wrong. She remembers at the time being disappointed when she saw that a children's play gym had replaced the site of the old Officers Club. If Dana had just turned around, she would have had the shot. As it turns out, the Officers Club was located on the northwest corner of McClellan and Custer Avenues and not the southeast corner. The real former location of the old Officers Club is now a parking lot for the JAG building that is located just to the left of the parking lot. The next few buildings are still used today and were opened during the time Fitzgerald was on base. This photograph is labeled Building 55. This building was a former base hospital. Since Fitzgerald was known as somewhat of a hypochondriac, how many of you think he might have stopped by once or twice with a health-related concern? Raise your hand. I thought so. The building presently houses offices for the Army Community Service Administration. This building, labeled 244, was the Bachelor Officers' Mess Building. This is where Fitzgerald would have taken his meals. The building is now housed by the staff of the Judge Advocate and Federal Courtroom. This building, labeled 43, was the old Bachelor Officers' Quarters. This is where Fitzgerald lived while he was on base. This building is now office space for several Army activities. In 2006, my former principal, Mr. Michael Robinson, now employed by the fort, made an unprecedented discovery. While working in Bell Hall, which is the former location of the history department, he found 2 shadow boxes that contained information about Fitzgerald and his stay at the fort. Because he remembered the time I attended the 2005 New York conference and how crazy I was about Fitzgerald, he emailed me these photos. Imagine my surprise when I got his email. That is when I decided to change my focus on Fitzgerald from the 1920s and fashion to his time he spent at Fort Leavenworth. Both of these shadow boxes were created by the Fort Leavenworth Historical Society and presented to the fort in 1986. A Mr. John Richley, former history professor at the fort and president of the Fort Leavenworth Historical Society at the time, came up with the shadow box idea to honor former famous people who once attended Fort Leavenworth. 5 other shadow boxes exist. One of the other shadow boxes contains information about Buffalo Bill and his stay at the fort. Each shadow box contains the same information. They both contain the same picture of Fitzgerald in his army uniform minus the hat. Each shadow box contains a copy of his first book, This Side of Paradise. Each shadow box contains a replica of Fitzgerald's U.S. insignia pin, his infantry rifle pin, and his lieutenant bar. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a member of the 45th Infantry Regiment. Each shadow box also contains a plate which is paraphrased from a short story Fitzgerald wrote entitled What I Think and Feel at 25, which was published in the American Magazine, Volume 96, in September of 1922. The plate reads, From November 1917 to February 1918, 2nd Lieutenant F. Scott Fitzgerald underwent officer training at Fort Leavenworth. While here, he wrote the first draft of his first novel, This Side of Paradise. In his own words, every evening, concealing my pad behind small problems of infantry, I wrote paragraph after paragraph. After 2 chapters, I was detected by Captain Dwight Eisenhower, and the game was up. I could write no more during study period. The bottom of this plate contains this final paragraph. In the basement of the Post Officers Club, which has since burned down, he wrote from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m. on Saturdays, and from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sundays, completing the 120,000-word draft in 3 months. I hope this presentation has shined some new light on the biographical sketch of Fitzgerald's life. I am so proud to live in the state of Kansas, which houses Fort Leavenworth, the oldest active Army post west of the Mississippi River, and has served the needs of our nation since 1827. In 2007, the Lewis and Clark Center opened and became the new home to the Command and General Staff College. The building houses the new Combined Arms Research Library known as CARL, and classes for the School of Advanced Military Studies and the School for Command Preparation are located in Eisenhower Hall, which just happens to be located across from Mr. Robinson's office. I would like to give a special thanks to my former principal, Mr. Michael Robinson, whom without his help this presentation could not be made.